space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
The first thing I'd like to show you is this, the USS Enterprise. The beauty of the USS Enterprise was that it was the first ship I ever saw designed that had no way of landing on a planet. And the invention of the transport system was fascinating. This model that you see here is not a model. It was actually built like this and was bought. It was a gift from my daughter, and it is probably the nicest, most beautiful Enterprise I've ever had. I absolutely love it. Then this one is something that the Franklin Mint created back in the 70s. And as you can see, because it's made out of lead, the turbo tubes have kind of leaned down a little bit more than they should. But it actually is a very beautiful piece of Star Trek history. And I have others. I am not going to bring them down because I would have to go through areas of my office that I really don't want to explore at this point, and they're kind of sealed. So let's move on to some of the other subjects I want to talk about, because Star Trek has got a lot of history with me. So this is an exciting episode for me, and one that I've been really looking forward to doing for a while. So the first thing I want to do is this is a comic book show, so I want to show the comic book. This is the comic book of the original motion picture. I actually have it in a 9.8. This would easily get me a 9.8. Unfortunately, the value of the comic itself is not up there. The Star Trek comic books that have a lot of value are the gold keys. And here is an example of a collection of these gold key comics in what was called the Enterprise Logs. And this one, as you can see, is in pretty bad shape. It was given to me by my mother-in-law. She knew I loved Star Trek, and she found it as she was going through, I think a pawn, not a pawn shop, but a thrift shop. And they had some comic books, and she saw this, and she immediately thought to get it for me. And I've always kept it because I always liked the fact that, she knew enough to pick this up for me. And actually, it's got some pretty cool stories. So these are really, they could get into the thousands of dollars, some of these gold key, because they're really tough to find, and they're really hard to find in good shape. But beyond that, I want to show you guys some of the books that were created about Star Trek. This is The Trouble with Tribbles. And this is a real Star Trek space station. This is what the space stations look like in the original series. The Trouble with Tribbles was a very popular story. And it was so popular that they came out with this book. This book is the 6th printing of this book. That's how popular Star Trek was. This is 1975. The series stopped airing in 1970, maybe 69. I think it was 69. But by 1975, they'd had 6 printings of this book. And the book is divided into 2 sections. The first one is basically the making of The Trouble with Tribbles, right? How the Tribbles were designed, how they functioned, how they made them move, some of the makeup for Kirk and how they made him look. So there was a lot of information about, and check out George Takei's hair over here. There was a lot of of information and backstage, uh, photographs that were embedded in the book, and it was a great book. I read it a long time ago. Then the second part of the book is the actual manuscript of the episode, and it goes through what each character says, who says it, and it basically walks you through the entire thing. So this was just one of the books, and actually not my favorite. Then we have Star Trek Lives. Star Trek Lives is more about what the world of Star Trek was like. What was the universe that they lived in? If it were real, and you were in it, what were the rules behind it? How did it function? Some of the backstories. For example, here it says Spock is not an idea man. Spock is more of an analyst. And things of that nature. It kind of defined a lot of the different stories behind Star Trek. And it also talked about the effect that Star Trek had on the viewing public. Syndication became very popular in syndication. And I'll tell you something about Star Trek. The original name was supposed to be Wagon Train to the Stars. And I learned this in the making of Star Trek. This is the book. You want to learn about Star Trek? There's nothing better than this one. This one is the one that tells you all about the different episodes, how they were created, how a salt shaker became the device that McCoy uses to see if someone's healthy. It also talks about the fact that they worked shoulder to shoulder with NASA engineers on making Star Trek, because that Wagon Train to the Stars was the result of Gene Roddenberry having been a Navy officer and pilot. And he loved everything having to do with the Navy and being a pilot. So he thought, what if the Navy was in space? And that's how he invented Star Trek. When he called it Wagon Train to the Stars, it was because he was thinking of the Old West. And he thought of the fact that, like, the wagon trains would go into the West and it was an unknown territory, so did the USS Enterprise venture out into an unknown territory. But the makings, the structure, all of it was the U.S. Navy, if it ever got into space. Some of the most fascinating stories about Star Trek are in this book. I mean, it talks about every single thing, the actual dimensions of the shuttlecraft, what it was like inside the ship, if it would have been real. I mean, and what actually happened, the figures that were used as aliens, the thought behind them. But again, what I found most fascinating was how closely they worked with NASA. And here is, I think, Gene Roddenberry, Jimmy Doohan, which was Scotty, and DeForest Kelley, which was Dr. McCoy at NASA. And they were at NASA, not touring NASA, but actually working with NASA. The other things you learned is how the automatic opening and shutting of doors was actually done by humans that were sitting on the opposite side. And when they would walk, they would open the doors, which led to some of the most funniest bloopers you could ever see. Because early in comic book conventions, they were also tied to science fiction. So there was always a dark room where a projector was set. And in those rooms, you'd get movies. And in between the movie, there would always be two major films, right? And 9 times out of 10, it was the world, how the Earth stood still, followed then by This Island Earth. Those were like the constants of those movies back then. And then in between, they would play also Star Trek movies, Star Trek episodes. So they would have a couple of Star Trek episodes in the morning, one of the movies, then a break at lunch while they played the Star Trek bloopers. And the Star Trek bloopers were all the mistakes that were made on the set. And it became infamous. Every convention, you saw the Star Trek bloopers. And there you saw how the door wouldn't open and they would hit the door, how shirts would rip the wrong way, which was something that Shatner always had. Shatner was considered a ladies' man, a leading man. So his thing was to, take off his shirt as fast as he could. And the other thing was he had all the pretty women. And he was a ladies' man. I mean, when you saw him with those women, I think what went on in front of the camera went on behind the camera. And if you notice, Star Trek was not necessarily woke. It was woke in the fact that women were treated just like men, but it wasn't stupidly woke where women could not be women. They wore dresses, they were sexy, and they represented themselves as women rather than just another version of a human being, similar to a man, and a man being another version of a human being. The whole concept of, there's just a person rather than a person that has some sort of role from birth biologically was still living in Star Trek, which we've kind of lost today. And, to each their own. I'm not going to force my views on anyone, but at the same time, I don't allow anybody to force their views on me. So this is another one. This is Letters to Star Trek. This was a really touching book because in this book, there were not only letters from engineers in NASA that talked about the fact that they became these engineers. This was a later book. By the way, the making of Star Trek, 17 printings. 17 printings. Letters to Star Trek, I think, was the least reprinted. This is actually a first edition, so I can't tell you how many printing there are. This was 1977. This was 1975. Originally 73. Originally 73. Originally 73. So there was a lot coming out in 73 because that's when Star Trek hit syndication, and the public or Paramount realized they had a hit on their hands because they never thought it would. As a matter of fact, Gene Roddenberry was turned down several times. The Menagerie, which later became, or the original Star Trek episode that later became The Menagerie, was rejected by Paramount, or I think it was CBS. One of them rejected it, and for a while there, Roddenberry thought he was never going to get another shot, but somehow it fell into the hands of two very famous people at the time, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And they saw it and they thought, we want to back this. And that's why you see Desi-Lu Productions, because that means Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball at the end of every original Star Trek episode. They were the guys that gave the money to make it. And Lucy actually thought it was a great show and really wanted to bankroll it. Desi helped in the production because many people don't know this, but the modern structure of how television shows are even shot today, the fact that rooms, you walk from one room to another, they're circular rooms with cameras all the way around it, that was all invented by Desi Arnaz, who was actually pretty ingenious when it came to television production. From early on, he invented a lot of the rules behind live audience, television production, and the way you shot things, so you had one continual flow, rather than when you see some of the earlier episodes and the camera has to black out. In Lucy, you could see her walk from one room to another without a break, and that was because the stage was circular. So a lot of those effects were used in the Star Trek series because they actually bankrolled it. But one of the most touching stories before I get there, one of the stories that I thought was really cool is that there's an invention today called the ion engine. And the ion engine was developed by an engineer. That wasn't here. This was in the 80s. And I read that during the 80s. The ion engine that was developed at NASA goes very slow, but it never stops shooting ions out and eventually gets faster than any ship we've ever sent into space. And we've sent several of them. But the ion engine was related to Star Trek because in Star Trek, they had an ion engine. And the engineer at NASA that invented it saw Star Trek when he was a kid and was so fascinated by Star Trek that he wanted to invent the ion engine. because he thought in college that there was a way to do it. So he credited the fact that he invented it from the show. And likewise, many other inventions came from Star Trek. Star Trek, for example, the MRI, the open MRI is what McCoy uses in sickbay. When he lays people down and you see the stats behind it, that's literally the equivalent of the modern open MRI, not even the closed MRI. So there's a lot of things in Star Trek that people don't realize. But anyway, getting back to letters to Star Trek, there's a story here about a child that actually is got cancer and he's dying, and he writes to Kirk and Spock and explains to them how the only thing that would make him happy while he was in the hospital was watching Star Trek. And because of it, both William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy went to the hospital to see this boy, and they took photographs with him. And I think the photographs appear in this book. I know that that's the story. I believe the photographs are in here. Let me see if I can quickly find them. I may not be able to, or maybe I'm wrong. There was no photograph. I just remember the story. No, I cannot find it. So anyway, Letters to Star Trek, great little book. So what else is there for Star Trek? Well, here's one I've had since, I think I've had this thing since 1975. Something of that nature. I try to even be careful opening it because it's so old. Yep, 1975. First printing, November 1975. The Star Trek Fleet Technical Manual. This book has a hard shell cover. Inside, there's the soft shell cover. $6.95. So you know it's old. It has the uniform color codes. Has Starfleet org chart. I mean, it has. Here's an actual coupon to get the Star Trek blueprints inside the book. But here is a uniform pattern in case you wanted to make a uniform. And here are the descriptions of the ships. This is each ship is broken down in detail. The Scout, the first one you saw was an Enterprise class, a transport. So you can just go on and on. Here's a dreadnought. They never showed a dreadnought. I think in the original series they never showed one. I think in one of the movies they had one. The console. And this is the Hellman station with what every button does, which is amazing, right? I mean, considering none of it existed, tricorder. So anyway, this is the Starfleet Technical Manual. And, oh, by the way, here, the female uniform. That wouldn't be woke. So anyway, that is that. Now, here is something that I have that's not original series. And that is Star Trek Next Generation. And it's basically the story of how they made the Next Generation. Right? And you know what I always found fascinating about Star Trek was the wonderful story of hope that you got from it. By the way, this actually has Janeway, so it goes beyond just the Next Generation. And it does. It goes into Deep Space Nine. It goes into Voyager. So it actually covers all the series except the original series, which has had enough books made of it, so I don't necessarily think they needed another one, which is good. And now I remember why I had this book. So yeah, the stories of hope, the stories of humanity, behind the original series I thought were spectacular. I think the Next Generation and even Voyager had some of that. I will tell you that some years ago I picked up an audiobook that was the origin of Janeway. And it was probably one of the best Star Trek books I have ever heard because I normally do audios versus reading. So anyway, if you like those books, I can recommend that the Voyager book was good. I can't tell you what name it was because it was 15 years ago. I don't have it anymore. But I was surprised. I was actually pleasantly surprised. Now I'm going to show you something that's a lot more rare. This is what's called the Star Trek photo novel. This is The City on the Edge of Forever. This was a show that won a Hugo Award and was considered one of the best shows ever done by Star Trek. But what's fascinating is it's the entire episode with word bubbles, but with photographs. Every single part of the episode. So the entire book is the entire episode with word bubbles, and it was called a photo novel. Very, very rare. I have mine in excellent, I would say, mint condition. I don't see anything wrong with these books. Publication date 1977, Where No Man Has Gone Before, Trouble with Tribbles, A Taste of Armageddon, All Our Yesterdays, Galileo 7. You notice the creases on this one? That was one of my favorite episodes. I probably read this one 3 or 4 times because I read them all. You know, you got to remember there was a time that VHS tapes didn't exist. So if you wanted to get Star Trek and see it at your leisure, this was a way you could do it on demand. The only way. Devil in the Dark. See, 300 full color authentic scenes. Day of the Dove. And that's it. That's it for the photo novels. I think they're fascinating. They're very cool. And I've had these, again, all of them since 1977. Now, this brings us to the end of our Star Trek episode. I'd like to say that if you have an interest in Star Trek, write me in the comment section. Please hit my subscribe button and also my like button. I'd like to bring you a lot more content. I think that hopefully you don't mind that this one is not about comics, but Star Trek and comic books have been tied together since the early conventions. I would go to conventions and see Stan Lee and then go watch a Star Trek episode. And that was pretty common for all of us growing up in the 70s. That's just the way life was in the late 60s. So I hope you've enjoyed this little cruise through Star Trek history. Again, there's a lot more that I could talk about. There's so many episodes. If you have a chance, catch Wrath of Khan, the movie. Excellent movie. And the whole concept behind it was great. So now, before I sign off, I want to actually show you the sale that I just got, or the sale that I am just making. There's 2 of them. And there's some lucky buyers that are going to get some really nice books. So the first one is Witchblade. Now I'm not going to take it out. Guarantee you it's a perfect mint. Never even been opened, never even been paged through, never been read. And this is a certificate of authenticity because this is a Wizard Special half issue. So if you bought this, this is absolutely pristine mint. Then I have some X-Men. X-Men 316. By the way, that did nothing. So if you bought these books, don't worry. X-Men 317. And X-Men 292. All of these I've been the only owner. I bought each and every one of them off the newsstand, as you would say, but truly I bought them all um, at a comic book store. But I was the original owner. I bought them. I bagged them. If you bought these, every single one of these is 9.8. I wouldn't be surprised if you could get an actual 10.0 in some cases. I mean, I just think there's nothing wrong with these books. They're actually perfect. Look at the centering on that. It's like absolutely on the money. Look at this. Look at this one. This one has the black line. There is nothing there, just the black line. Perfectly centered. Every corner is immaculate. Yep, let's see. Yeah, the bag had a little like wrinkle on it that I wasn't sure if it was the bag or the comic, but it's just the bag. So congratulations. You guys are going to get some great books. These witch blades are probably the most beautiful, some of the most beautiful artwork I've ever seen. I'm not going to open it, but I am going to move the certificate of authenticity so that you can see this comic book, because it's actually gorgeous. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly enjoyed bringing you Star Trek. I love the show. I got to tell you that in current times, we've had some horrible experiences with remakes. The Chris Pine one, the very first one, was decent because I think it had so many elements from the original series that we liked. Zachary Quinto actually played a really good Spock. Chris Pine played a really good Captain Kirk. The story, okay. The beginning, great, but the rest of it was okay. Then it just went to, sorry to say this, but shit in a handbasket. And then this new thing that Paramount's putting out, I started watching it. I saw season 1. One thing that's great on that show is Captain Pike. The rendition done by that actor of Pike has been phenomenal. I love the storyline with Pike. I loved his flashbacks and the way that his future was already mapped for him, and he knew there was a fate that was coming at him that was horrible, yet he took the chance and did what he did in the show. That was great. Besides that, the rest of it was garbage. So hopefully one day they'll get it right. I think they've tortured Star Trek to the point where I don't know when they're going to be able to get it right. I mean, if you want to see something that's even better, go watch the 1970s cartoons. They made cartoons of Star Trek that were phenomenal, and they were aired on Saturday mornings. That's better than anything they've been able to film since then, with the exception of some of the original movies. But anyway, guys, thank you, and I'll be seeing you soon. Please remember, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and if you got any questions, send them to me. My email's coming up next, and you can always put it as a comment on underneath. Thanks.